All right, next on our 10th edition phase chart, we've got the movement phase. So for this edition, we're going to have um, many of the same things we've seen before with our different movement options of remaining stationary, normal move, advance, and fall back. Stationary is obviously they don't move at all. Normal move is their movement stat. Advance is the same in this new edition where it's movement stat plus a d6, so it has some variation. I'm sure we'll see certain units that just say flat d6, and that's okay too. And then fallback. Fallback, just like before, when you fall back, you can't fall back through enemy models and things like that. So we're going to have some of the same strats we had before with triangling and things like that. Just for clarity, because it's a good time to talk about it, measuring distance, it's still the closest point of a model's base. Or if they don't have a base, then the closest part of the model. Many times you call it hull, but technically it applies to more than just that for those things. So anyway, most of the movement phase is almost identical to what we've seen in the past. So with remaining stationary, normal move, etc. Falling back is the one thing that we're going to talk about because it does have some changes to that. Just like we saw before, when a unit falls back, it cannot shoot or charge in the same turn. However, now we have this thing called Desperate Escape. Anytime that you would fall back, but you can't, let's say, or you have to fall back, but you can't because a model's trapped, you are allowed to do a Desperate Escape. When you do a Desperate Escape, then before you actually move the models in order to fall back, you're going to roll a die for each model. And these are separate tests, which is really important because the fact that they're separate tests means that your special weapons and your sergeant, and if you have characters in the unit, they're all going to make a separate roll. It's not like we've seen with vehicles being destroyed and stuff like that, where you get to roll a bunch of dice for the whole unit and then decide based upon how many fails who dies. You're actually rolling for the individual models because they're each taking a separate test. It's very clear about that. So anyway, when you take this test, you're going to roll a die for the model, and on a 1 or a 2, the model is destroyed. It doesn't matter how many wounds it has, it just goes away, which again makes it very scary for if your unit has an attached character and you go to fall back, there's a chance that he just goes away. And that's a lot of, points and buffs and stuff like that to lose. So Desperate Escapes are pretty risky. Now, that being said, there are some units that auto pass. Anything with a Titanic keyword or the fly keyword automatically pass this test, which is really good to note. It makes those fly keyword really powerful. But when the unit is making a Desperate Escape, it may move through other models. So this is where, if you're triangled and stuff like that, you can get out if you're required to for some reason, whether that's your opponent's ability requires you to fall back, or whether or not you just really, really need to fall back because you're trapped, in your deployment zone, or there's some sort of other thing going on the table. One of the things that you really have to watch out for here is that if your unit is battle shocked, right? You get into combat because your opponent charged you and you have a rough time, and then you battle shock during the command phase. If you fail that battle shock and you decide to fall back, then every fallback is a Desperate Escape, whether you like it or not, which makes falling back while battle shocked very scary. Because even if you've only got, a couple of models left, and, you've kept your sergeant, your character, and there's not very many, even if you don't need to pass through enemy models, you still count as that Desperate Escape, so you could still be losing models. I don't want to say for no reason, but there's a much higher chance that you lose models for falling back because they're battle shocked.
So I find it interesting that you're losing through Desperate Escape instead of losing through leadership test or battle shock tests.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not losing models on the morale test, so to speak, or the battle shock test as it is now. you're losing on the fallback potentially.
which which I think is actually good. And I say that not because it's more forgiving, which it is, but I think it's good because for a lot of us who like the more narrative play and like some amount of logic in what we're doing between the different weapons matching what they're supposed to do and things like that. This makes a lot more sense, right? If you are battle shocked, sometimes it means you're just pinned. Your guys get scared because there's a bunch of bugs shooting big scary guns over your regular human head, right? Um, but as much as you're just pinned and your dudes are scared and they're taking cover, that doesn't mean that guys are just running away because they're pinned in place. Desperate escape, by the time that you are running away from an enemy, you're way more likely to get stabbed in the back or get caught as you're turning away, and that's where you have your problem and start losing models. So I think this is a nice balance in getting that morale to matter when it comes to losing models, but doing it in a place where it more logically makes sense that you're going to lose a guy.
Yeah, I also like that it's not just you lose X number of guys based on the dice roll and you get to choose. Because then you get like this perfect optimal situation. Now it's random.
Yep.
And I feel like
Which
that ends up being more fair in the end.
I think it is too, mostly because I mean, how many times have we, had a vehicle explode and we decide to only keep the 3 important models and everybody else dies? And like, as much as like that's good for us because explosions are random and sometimes they're, the dice go against us and we feel bad about that. It's, I think, more fair to our opponent if we recognize that when an explosion happens, the best guys aren't like guaranteed to be protected. That's just not how the explosion works, and that's not how running away from the enemy works. The enemy doesn't target only the weakest guys.
Yeah, so no more plot armor for the sergeants. I get it.
Yep.
Okay,
Which is good, especially because once you're losing guys, that battle shock test is going to get harder and harder, especially when you have a higher chance to lose your sergeants and characters and things like that.
Yeah. Okay. What do you have anything else on this one?
No, there are going to be some movement phase shenanigans. I've already seen it in the rule book, and I've already come up with some crazy ideas. But we're going to go over some of those in later videos, and some of those are going to become a little more apparent as we get into some of the other phases, like the charge phase and things like that. So I think that's good on the movement phase, and we'll continue through the new core rule book and get you more videos going over all the new changes.
Right. Cool. Thanks, everybody.